This week on The Inside Story, with both parties' nominees firmly in place, the focus now shifts to the nuts and bolts of policy, immigration reform, and America's southern border with Mexico, a rising China, and the tit-for-tat tornado of tariffs, support for allies like Israel and Ukraine, and tens of millions of Americans reached voting age since the last election. We'll show you how that may play out in November. Now, on The Inside Story, USA Votes 2024, Foreign Policy.
Hello and welcome to The Inside Story. I'm Elizabeth Lee. This week we focus on the destabilizing conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine, regions sure to be affected by the differing foreign policies of the U.S. presidential candidates. Israel on Tuesday announced it had rescued one of the hostages taken on October 7. Still, more than 100 remain unaccounted for, and Israeli forces continue to attack suspected Hamas sites in Gaza. Meanwhile, the war continues to expand into Lebanon. On Sunday, Israeli troops and Hezbollah exchanged cross-border fire, marking the heaviest exchanges in months. All this as ceasefire talks continue in Egypt. VOA's Patsy Wirakoswara begins our coverage.
Another deadly Israeli strike on another refugee camp in Gaza as negotiators strive to reach a ceasefire deal in return for the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas. One of them was rescued on Tuesday.
Welcome
home, Farhan al-Qadi. I congratulate the Israeli army and Shin Bet on another successful rescue operation. We are working tirelessly to bring all our hostages back.
That's a message Vice President Kamala Harris also underscored as she accepted her nomination as the Democratic Party's presidential nominee last week.
President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
Outside of her term as vice president, Harris has no foreign policy background. Her national security advisor is Philip Gordon, who served under Democratic presidents including Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, as well as Joe Biden.
End this war.
This signals a continuity with past Democratic administrations, including on military support for Israel, something her former national security advisor reaffirms.
The vice president and the president have supported U.S. military assistance to Israel, not just per the existing agreement that we have with Israel, but also an increase this year because of their security needs.
This despite demands from Arab and Muslim Americans, as well as progressive and young Democrats, for an embargo on arms sales to Israel. At the same time, Harris has expressed more sympathy towards Palestinian suffering than Biden has.
We can't learn a lot from what she says, because what she says now is directed to winning an election and to keeping the Democratic Party together. And since the Democratic Party is divided between those who are more sympathetic to Israel and those who are more sympathetic to the Palestinians about evenly, she has to say basically platitudes. And that's what she's done.
Compared to Biden, who often underscores he is a Zionist, Harris, the daughter of immigrants from Jamaica and India, may be more cognizant of views from the global South.
She is aware of how the rest of the world may feel about the Middle East, about neocolonialism, neo-imperialism. And I really hope that she has the opportunity to bring those experiences to bear if she becomes the president, because that is the reality of what U.S. foreign policy needs to confront the challenges ahead, which are very different from the challenges of the past 3 decades.
Should she win in November, Harris will inherit the challenges of her predecessors, including a protracted conflict in the Middle East. She will need to formulate her own foreign policy,
Free Palestine!
a a high-stakes complex affair that juggles multiple interests. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
Former President Donald Trump meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
No president has done what I've done for Israel, and we've always had a very good relationship.
Trump has previously criticized Netanyahu for security failures he claims enabled the October 7th Hamas attack. Unpredictability was a hallmark of Trump's foreign policy while in office. One analyst told VOA the Republican Party's 2024 foreign policy platform reflects that.
There are not a ton of specifics. That gives him the advantage of being able to shape a policy in a way that he sees fit in the moment, rather than getting locked into policies at the outset of a term.
Trump's fellow Republicans claim the social media app TikTok is controlled by the Chinese government and can be used to access user information and influence political beliefs.
I do not want the Chinese Communist Party getting personal data about our citizens, nor being able to have algorithms that would propagandize the American public.
But Trump reversed his position on banning TikTok this year.
We're going to save TikTok. They want to destroy TikTok. So all of the people on TikTok vote for Trump.
Trump has also criticized NATO, claiming member countries do not pay their fair share for the common defense. His running mate, vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance, has been even more critical of the United States sending aid money to Ukraine.
But let's not mistake the courage of the Ukrainian troops on the ground with the fact that they have the most corrupt leadership and corrupt government in Europe, and maybe the most corrupt leadership anywhere in the world.
That is in direct opposition to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who has argued aid to Ukraine is essential to defending democracy in Europe.
It's no longer a settled question that America will meet aggression with overwhelming force, or even that we'll back our allies 100%.
Analysts say Trump's calls to raise tariffs if he is elected to a second term could cause the most conflict with Republican lawmakers.
It shows the transformation of the Republican Party since 2016, because the Republicans historically have been free traders.
Trump has pledged to introduce at least 60% tariffs on China and 10% tariffs on imports from other countries if he is reelected. Catherine Gibson, VOA News.
Russia launched a barrage of missile attacks and drones inside Ukraine, targeting the country's energy infrastructure. The attacks damaged part of the country's electricity and water supply infrastructure and also killed at least 6 people. At the same time, Ukrainian forces continue their advance into Russian territory near the western city of Kursk. They have reportedly captured hundreds of Russian prisoners, and Kyiv hopes the new prisoners can be swapped for Ukrainian POWs, some of whom came home this weekend. Anna Chernikova reports.
Voice of America attended the 55th exchange of the prisoners of war between Ukraine and Russia, which happened symbolically as Ukraine celebrates its 33rd Independence Day. This is the first prisoner exchange between the two countries since Ukraine began its operation in the Kursk region. 115 Ukrainian prisoners of war returned home. According to the Ukrainian Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War, all servicemen are conscripts, including those who were captured in the first months of Russia's full-scale invasion in February of 2022.
Today we managed to return 115 of our heroes home, and the total number of our freed citizens to date is not 3,405, but 3,520 heroes and heroines.
Ukrainian soldiers look exhausted but happy to be home. Many of them, like Yevhen, who did not want to give his full name for security reasons, spent 2.5 years in Russian captivity.
2.5 years. It is, of course, very difficult, but it's okay. We endured. Our boys are still there, waiting to return home. We spent so much time in captivity, I think not for nothing. Most of the boys who were exchanged will continue their service. We will continue to defend our motherland. The main thing is to hold on, not to give in. They will soon break their teeth on us.
It's very difficult to be in captivity there, thousands of kilometers from home. Very hard.
President Volodymyr Zelensky says that one of the main goals of the Ukrainian operation in the Kursk region is to increase the exchange fund and return Ukrainian prisoners.
In general, this operation became our largest investment in the process of freeing Ukrainian men and women from Russian captivity. We've already captured the largest number of Russian prisoners in one operation, and this is a significant result. It is one of our goals.
This exchange took place 3 weeks after Ukraine's surprise incursion into Russia. According to Ukrainian officials, Ukrainian forces have already captured thousands of Russian servicemen. Many of them are conscripts. The Russian Social Movement for the Search and Return of Russian Military Personnel from Captivity reported that 115 Russian conscripts were returned to Moscow as a part of the exchange. While there is no official confirmation that these Russian conscripts were captured in the Kursk region, many in Ukraine believe the operation in Kursk will improve the chances of the Ukrainian prisoners of war coming home. Anna Chernikova, VOA News, Kyiv.
The candidates that win November's presidential election will inherit a world filled with challenging foreign policy issues. They include America's policy at the southern border with Mexico and immigration, support for Israel, U.S.-China competition and tariffs, plus aid to Ukraine. Each party's policy platform on how to handle these issues is different, especially on Ukraine. Harris, like President Joe Biden, says the U.S. will not waver. But Trump says he'll slash support, even once saying he'd let Russia do, quote, whatever the hell they want. There's a lot to unpack, but we've got you covered in our special foreign policy segment.
This was a gold mining town, the richest strike in the state of Arizona at the time.
Now a ghost town.
Yeah.
Patty Burris lives here with Beano, her 38-year-old donkey.
Come here, buddy. There you go.
Burris says she's tired of undocumented migrants sneaking across her land from the Mexican border. Former President Donald Trump gets her vote.
He's going to deport them. Yes, I am all for that. Absolutely. Get them out of here, and he can do it. He knows how.
While President Donald Trump ordered a 740-kilometer wall be built at the U.S. southwestern border, this is the Arizona portion of it. On his first day in office, Joe Biden paused any new construction on the wall.
They could have had it completed in 3 weeks. But
Donald Trump returned to an Arizona border wall last Thursday, although the Washington Post reports this section he visited was built before he became president.
Because there's never been a border in the whole world that's leaked like this border, with all those millions and millions of criminals coming through.
Democratic voters at their convention say their party is more tolerant.
Immigrants, we belong, the neighbors, we take care of each other. That's really what it's all about.
If elected, Vice President Kamala Harris promises a path to citizenship and the return of a bipartisan immigration bill that died in Congress.
The Border Patrol endorsed it. But Donald Trump believes a border deal would hurt his campaign. So he ordered his allies in Congress to kill the deal.
Back at the ghost town. So Harris would not control the border as
Don't
much
believe a word she says. Where's she been in the last 4 years?
Nobody stops by the old deserted town much anymore. Burris says she'd like to go back to the time when she saw more tourists come through than migrants. Carolyn Presutti, VOA News, Pierce, Arizona.
Thousands of Central American migrants cross Mexico every year, heading for the U.S. border. Coordinating with the region to address the root causes of migration was a task assigned to Vice President Kamala Harris, leaving her open to attacks from her November rival, former President Donald Trump.
She was a bum, a failed vice president in a failed administration, with millions of people crossing, and she was the border czar.
Harris is not the administration's border czar, but on immigration, she brings a tough message to the campaign trail, highlighting her experience as California's Attorney General.
I went after transnational gangs, drug cartels, and human traffickers that came into our country illegally. I prosecuted them in case after case, and I won. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has been talking a big game about securing our border, but he does not walk the walk.
If elected, Harris said she'll bring back President Joe Biden's border bill that was killed by pro-Trump Republicans in Congress. She'd continue his efforts to help Ukraine while preventing direct war with Russia and work to maintain unity among NATO allies. Also expect continuity in the Indo-Pacific.
The United States stands with the Philippines in the face of intimidation and coercion in the South China Sea.
And on trade with China.
She will continue, as she has said, to try to de-risk from China. We know that when she ran for president in 2020, she was fairly tariff averse, like President Biden. She seems to have changed her mind about that. So more continuity than otherwise.
On Gaza, Harris is aligned with Biden, aiming for a ceasefire and preventing a regional war. However, with a large swath of the Democratic electorate angry at Biden's staunch support for Israel, Harris appears to be much more sympathetic to Palestinian casualties.
We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent.
Harris has embraced the Biden doctrine of leading by relying on allies and partners, and has focused on non-traditional security threats, chairing the National Space Council and promoting the administration's policies on artificial intelligence and climate.
So when people say, oh, she just had the immigration portfolio and we have a terrible immigration problem, they aren't really encompassing the full role that she's played in every region of the world.
Despite her almost 4 years of traveling the globe, meeting 150 heads of state and government, Trump says Harris is inexperienced and unaccomplished.
She is a radical left lunatic who will destroy our country.
Her response?
If you got something to say,
Patsy Huswara, VOA News at the White House.
Campaign organizers from both parties are working on getting new young voters who are finally old enough to be eligible to vote in November to the ballot box. Organizers say they've seen a swell in voter enthusiasm and support, but younger voters have historically low turnout at the polls. VOA's Tina Trin explores what it takes to motivate young voters.
A growing share of U.S. voters are young people who could play a pivotal role in the general election this November, perhaps even helping to elect the first woman president in U.S. history. That is, if they turn out to vote.
The reasons why young people are a little bit more dubious about showing up this election cycle is directly tied to their frustration with how our current government is working. Young people are experiencing a lot of frustration because they're not seeing change happen at the speed in which they would like to see it happen in their communities.
But since Vice President Kamala Harris became the Democratic presidential nominee, there's been a notable shift in terms of excitement.
The numbers with young voters in particular were great. On enthusiasm especially, we saw a 5 percentage point increase in young voters' intent to vote basically overnight.
19-year-old Celeste Galvez is one of those who's feeling energized by the change.
I was not really planning on even voting in the first place, but now that he's dropped out and Kamala's running, I'm more excited for stepping into a new world where you can have a woman as a president. I'm actually excited about politics now.
The excitement has translated to a spike in new voter registrations. Vote.org reported over 100,000 people registering to vote in the 7 days after Joe Biden announced he was stepping down, with voters ages 18 to 34 making up nearly 85% of those new registrations. But the presidential race remains close, and there are equal numbers of young voters, particularly young men, who favor former President Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee.
a lot of them don't find that the U.S. economy as a whole works for them. So when Democrats talk about record job growth, huge number of jobs that President Biden has created, they don't see themselves in that framework.
26-year-old Frankie Russell is one of them.
The way to get my age is that you got to talk to my age group. You can't be running the same low taxes, the claim of like, we just lower taxes, guns, and faith. I'm like, well, that's not enough. We need other stuff, we need American first policy in general, no new wars. No sending our money overseas, but keeping it at home.
Frustration does not equal apathy. Young people actually understand what's happening in politics. They care about what's going on. They're just not seeing the change that they want to see be actuated through engaging in the electoral process. But I think that the switch up that has happened over the last couple of weeks has definitely created a new trajectory.
Whether that trajectory will extend to the ballot box remains to be seen, but it's clear that young voters should not be discounted come November. Tina Trin, VOA News, New York.
Since 2020, Asian Americans have been the fastest growing group of eligible voters in the United States. This according to the Pew Research Center. Just 2 years ago, California had the highest number of eligible Asian American voters in the U.S., followed by New York and Texas. I recently visited Houston, Texas, the most diverse large city in the U.S. One-bedroom community there has a population that is more than 20% Asian. For flavors from Asia, Houston, Texas is a one-stop shop. The foods found here reflect the melting pot of Asian cultures living in the counties that make up the greater Houston region. One of them is suburban Fort Bend County, where Asians make up more than 21% of the population. It's also where Chinese-American immigrant J.J. Clements lives.
I think for either party, they really cannot afford to ignore the Asian community.
Asian Americans are among the fastest-growing ethnic groups in the U.S., according to census data. Voter turnout among this group has also seen record increases in the past two presidential elections. The Democratic nominee for president, Kamala Harris, has taken notice and recently released 2 ads targeting Asians. More Asian Americans call themselves Democrat than Republican. One reason? More than half of Asian American voters are immigrants.
I think Trump's policies hurt minorities a lot.
A lot of his policies not only took aim at illegal immigrants from Mexico or South America, but also restricted legal immigration.
Still, a 2024 survey of Asian American voters found that 22% identify as Republicans.
Less government is what Asians want. More freedom and less tax.
The survey also found 31% of Asian American voters identify as independents. But 42% of Asian American voters surveyed say they have not been contacted by political candidates or a political party. Daniel Wong, who had served in local elected office, says Asian American voters are partly responsible.
We are not organized. We don't understand the American political system. That's why we don't know how we're going to put our energy together to shoot for whatever common goal, which we don't have.
The projected 15 million Asian Americans eligible to vote have roots in different countries. Unifying Asian voters has been difficult. Getting Asians to donate to campaigns has also been a challenge, something Wong saw up close while running for a city council seat.
Right. Asian, they are not used to donate to the political means. They don't understand how it works.
Clements had also run for local office.
Asian society, I don't think they, like a Christian community, they have a habit to give. So you have to educate them, and you need to outreach them.
During the last presidential election, close to 60% of Asian Americans voted. Political activists say forming relationships with new Asian American citizens and educating them about the political process will mobilize them to get involved. I'm Elizabeth Lee. We'll see you next week for The Inside Story.